Welcome to the Swift Healthcare video podcast, exploring the intersection of healthcare and leadership, hosted by Dr. Patrick Swift. SwiftHealthcare.com is your resource for healthcare professionals to find coaching and consulting to engage, restore, and transform yourself and your organization. And now, here's your host, Dr. Patrick Swift.
Welcome, folks, to the Swift Healthcare video podcast. I'm Patrick Swift, and I want to thank you for tuning in, dialing in, for watching, being here. And I have a wonderful guest for us, Dan Edds. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick. It's great to be with you.
Well, let me share with everyone your bio. This is a good one. Listen to this. For 25 years, Dan Edds has been practicing as a management consultant, working with state and local government, healthcare, K through 12, education, and nonprofits. He's the author of 2 books. The first was Transformation Management, and his most recent, Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership, Cracking the Code of Sustainable Team Performance, is out and available. And his latest book describes how organizations are revolutionizing the practice of leadership, recreating the world of work. You hear that? He's recreating, not just keeping with the status quo, and setting new standards for employee engagement and customer value. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patrick.
And I'd like to add also, Dan doesn't know I'm going to be saying this, but he's also part of the advisory board in his local Salvation Army. So thank you, Dan, for your service to humanity. And I will ring a bell in celebration of the Salvation Army for a timeless recording. Someone may listen to this in December or maybe July, but
thank you.
Support the Salvation Army, right?
Absolutely. It's one of the world's fabulous organizations.
It truly is. So in our episode today, talking about engagement, talking about driving engagement, talking about leadership, discussing the intersection of healthcare and leadership, whether a listener is a leader, whether a listener is a aspiring leader, whether someone's just seen a leader, or someone is considering moving into a leadership position or wanting to be part of the conversation. The intention with this show is to pop the hood and give a chance to look under the hood about what's going on in healthcare, from how we think about healthcare as leaders and as human beings caring for human beings. And Dan has a wealth of experience helping executives, helping organizations, and helping leaders do better, not just improve the metrics, but also to make a bigger impact on this planet. So Dan, again, welcome to the show, and I appreciate all your expertise you're bringing to the table here.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. I'm honored.
Yeah. So let's talk about engagement. And I'd like to ask you, in your own words, to define engagement. It can mean a lot of different things to different people. And you've got a great perspective here on what is engagement about.
Well, that's a great question. And there's a couple of definitions, but basically engagement means we're intellectually, psychologically, and emotionally engaged with our work. Practically, the way that works out is we like going to our work every day. We don't see it as drudgery. We see it as a place where we can contribute, where we can give our best, when we can feel that our voice is valued and respected, where we, I say where we can contribute. One of the interesting things I've noticed in my consulting journey is I have never yet found a worker or a team that didn't want to contribute. In spite of what their bosses said sometimes, I consistently find that people want to feel good about their work. They want to feel proud of who they work for. And consistently, time after time after time, I find they are willing to sacrifice personal time so that they could work for an organization or a team that's high performing.
I love that you said that, Dan, because and we'll get into this, but you and I both know there's a certain percentage of the workforce that's actively disengaged, right?
Sure.
But what you're saying is hopeful. And there was a part in the back of my mind, I'm like, Dan, really? And what you're touching on is the hope that I think I've said before in another show, people don't choose evil for evil's sake. They mistake it for happiness. And what you're touching on is that people want to make a difference, even the one who's actively disengaged. If you ask that person, are you a jerk? That person probably say, no, I'm not a jerk. I just don't like the way things are done around here. Or I do want to make a difference. It's just you guys suck as leaders. And your message here, Dan, is how can we as leaders do a better job to engage everyone, not just the top 87% who are making that difference, but including the folks who are actively disengaged and, quite frankly, have some good to tell us that we can improve in our leadership.
Yep. Gallup tells us that within the U.S. right now, 2/3, 65% of the American workforce is either non-engaged, means they go to their job, they do their work, they do what they're told, they don't make any waves, and they go home and forget about it. They basically don't care. Another 13% are drilling holes in the back of the lifeboat. Worldwide, that number is 85%. So the percentage that's non-engaged right now, according to Gallup, is here in the States, is 52%. Means half of us go to work and we don't care. Yet if organizations that intentionally seek to engage that middle 50%, when they do, they see an automatic bump in productivity, an automatic bump in innovation, in customer satisfaction, and oh, by the way, a huge bump in employee engagement, and they end up with employees that want to be there.
That sounds like joy to me. So,
Yep.
Dan, tell me, what is your why behind all this? What motivates you?
Yeah, so my why has developed over time. There was never one point that said, oh, this is my why. But I'll give you one example. It was maybe 7, 8 years ago. I was doing a project for a fairly sizable state agency. This agency happened to license 450,000 healthcare providers. And they were a certifiable mess.
I can personally attest to having experienced that for licensure with a state agency, and I'm sure other healthcare providers listening to the show have dealt with state agencies trying to get their license renewed and all that.
Yep, it was all that, and this group was a mess. And it was my last meeting with the deputy director, and it was going to take them probably 18 months to implement what we had done, but there was some light at the end of the tunnel. And I was about ready to walk out the door. I had my coat on, I had my computer bag in my hand was on the door, and almost in a confessional tone, she said, I don't even tell my friends where I work anymore.
Oh.
And I turned around, I said, why? And she said, it's just too embarrassing. And I'd love to say I've never heard that ever before or since. But the reality is I've heard it dozens of times in various ways, in various venues. And I come back to the same thing. People want to be excited. They want to be proud of where they work. And when I looked at this particular deputy director in the organization that she was working for, there was no bad people there. But she was working in a system that rewarded the executive leaders for their position and placement to the governor. And they were not working in a system that required them or rewarded them to take care of their people, to take care of their customers, if you will, and to create an atmosphere within the organization or a culture within the organization that people wanted to come to. And when I walked out of her office, something just struck me, and I thought, this is a crime. This is
Real crime.
A crime that a bright, smart, well-educated, caring, compassionate, hardworking woman would feel embarrassed to tell her friends where she works.
Wow, that's powerful. And when I think about the amount of hospitals across this country, and there's those that are in the top 50%, there are those in the bottom quarter in ratings. So there's possibly a listener who's part of a health system or hospital or medical practice that's in the bottom quarter where they're not proud of where they work. And that's not a good feeling. And we as leaders have an opportunity to influence that. So God bless you for choosing to do this kind of work. Number one, Dan. Two, how can leaders sustain employee engagement and drive quality?
Yeah, great question. I'll reference 2 studies so you get the technical part first. Gallup says that 70% of the engagement of employees is a direct relationship to their manager. Kind of the old idea, people don't leave their companies or their organizations, they leave their manager.
Truth. Amen.
The MIT Sloan Management Review report that came out exactly a year ago, a report in there said that the number one factor in employee engagement is a spirit of collaboration with the team. Now, you could add a lot of things to that. You could add what Google has found, something called psychological safety, where people feel psychologically safe to express themselves, to express an opinion, to say, hey, I don't agree with this direction, or I have an idea over here, and to express those opinions without the fear of ridicule. In my research for the book, I found organizations that said, we value respect, and everything is going to be driven off of a culture of respect. I found in the United States Army, I had interviews with 2 senior officers. One was a full colonel, member of the Special Forces, U.S. Army Ranger, and another one, a retired 4-star general who also served in the Clinton administration in a cabinet position. I asked both of these guys, how does the Army approach leadership? And they both said, we practice servant leadership.
Oh.
And in the next breath, they started using a word that totally blew me away. And they started talking to me about love and how to love a soldier. Yes, that's the word.
I love it.
That's the word they used, love. And to my discredit, when I was talking to the colonel, I somewhat discounted his perspective because he was also a chaplain.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, he's a chaplain. That sort of fits. But a year later, I'm talking with, his name is General Barry McCaffrey, and you'll still see him on the news. He's a consultant for NBC News on issues of national security. And I said, so how does the Army approach leadership? And he says, well, we practice servant leadership. And literally the next breath, he's telling me about love on the battlefield. He's telling me about his experience with General Norman Schwarzkopf in the first Gulf War. And he said, it's exactly what he said. I was one of his divisional commanders, which for us non-Army types, that means that General McCaffrey had a small workforce of 26,000 soldiers. And he said, and this is exactly what he said, he, Schwarzkopf, actually loved me.
Oh,
and to be honest, I didn't.
Employees say that about their CEO.
Yeah, I didn't hear that when I was talking to him. I didn't even hear it till I was reading the transcript. And then I thought, did he really say that? And here you have a guy, he has led men into combat. He knows what that means. And today it would be men and women. He holds 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat in Vietnam. And here he is talking to me without shame about love in the United States Army as a senior officer.
That gives me chills. That gives me chills, Dan.
Yeah.
Beautiful point. Beautiful point. And I actually got a quote here in your book, and you didn't know this morning I was going to be highlighting this, but you've got a quote that I want to read here for folks to hear, because we're talking about servant leadership. Servant leadership is a philosophy that says the best leaders serve the workforce. They look out for the welfare of their subordinates. They willingly share power and help those they serve grow. It's a nice idea a lot of people talk and write about, but few know how to implement it. And I think what you're touching on there, the DNA of growing that and implementing it, is love.
It is. And frankly, that word in the context of, organizational leadership and management, and it makes me uncomfortable. I'm just not used to that word.
Good on you for still hanging in there, because I'm gonna go on and read here.
Okay.
One more little part here, because this is delicious. In a conversation I had with a senior executive of an international nonprofit, she joked that she'd had a supervisor who understood servant leadership as serving the coffee at the Monday morning staff meetings. The rest of the week, he just acted like a jerk.
Right.
I mean, coffee is the way to my heart. But the prospect that the way she describes that someone perceives servant leadership is, pouring you a coffee in the morning and then act like a jerk the rest of the week.
Yeah.
There are leaders in healthcare. There are leaders in all disciplines that have that perspective, but there are also leaders who stand on a foundation of love and grace and compassion and respect. And it's those leaders that we want to emulate, to highlight, to celebrate. And the fact that you wrote a book on a transformational roadmap for engaging your workforce, and we're talking about love, gives me chills. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, and the point of the book is really, we can talk about engaging the workforce and improving the leadership of individual leaders. 99% of the books that get written on leadership is all about improving your leadership so that you will do a better job of acquiring a following.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that can't scale to, let's say, a hospital with 5,000 employees.
Yeah. So throw me some meat here from the book about 3 things. A listener right now, driving down the road, jogging down the road, or sitting at the desk, that can tuck away.
Yeah.
Or how to drive engagement, driving value in the organization by celebrating the we and the human in the work that we do.
So I'll give you one example. It's one of the case studies in the book. It's with a hospital that is consistently ranked as one of the safest hospitals in the country. Some have suggested it might even be one of the safest hospitals in the world. And everything in this hospital starts out with a value of respect. Respect for the work, respect for the worker, and respect for the patient. And I think virtually every decision they make is made through this lens of respect. So when it comes to the worker, how do they respect the worker? Well, one way they do it, and this is one of the major findings that I saw, high impact organizations that consistently are able to engage their employees, see their employees not as an asset to be managed, which is a nice way of saying controlled.
Yeah, or a widget to produce.
Or a widget, right, as a unit of production.
Yeah.
They see their employees, their workforce, as human beings that are worthy of being developed for ever increasing value. So, for example, this healthcare organization, by rule, they train their leaders to not be problem solvers. Now, for you and us, myself, and those people in leadership positions, that's a whole different paradigm, because we are trained to be problem solvers.
Yeah.
This hospital says, no, we don't want our leaders and clinic managers to be problem solvers. In fact, we want them to push problem solving down to the level where the problem is actually occurring, because those people understand the problem better. And so if you are my boss, and I came to you with a problem, there's automatically 2 issues to deal with. Number one, I am coming to you. By training, leaders ought to be coming to me. In fact, you should be visiting with me at my workstation probably every day at a specific point in time. So that's the first problem. You're not doing your job if I'm coming to you with a problem. Second thing is, your job is to help me think through the problem, understand the scope of the problem, understand who the other people that may be affected by that problem, who they are, and maybe how they are being impacted by that problem. But ultimately, your job is to tell me, I trust you. You solve the problem and I'll support you.
Dan, I'm loving what you're saying, because there's 2 elements I want to underline here. One is something that folks are very familiar with, which is leader rounding and connecting with your staff. But there's also, one thing is moving your feet to your people.
Right.
The other is how you listen, and what you're proposing, which is radical for some. I think it's radical. Is to not be the person with the answers, intentionally not being the person with the answers, but intentionally listening to what people have to say about how we can do things better, how to solve the problem.
Right.
And I want to ask you, there's someone listening who works in an environment where they would love to do that, and that's their style. They're even servant leaders, and they work in an organization that says that they value that, but the senior leadership at the very top expects the next layer down to have all the answers, and then the next layer then has to have all the answers, and then you've got leaders on conference calls, Zoom calls, that have to report why are the metrics where they are, and you've got to have all the answers. So there's a conflict here. Help me solve this. In which you've got a middle, someone who's part of the solution, whether you're a leader or an informal leader where you make a difference. This applies to all of us, but you work in a place where the culture doesn't respect that the folks that are closest to the problems have the answers, and the senior leaders expect the leaders to have all the answers to begin with. So how would you navigate that?
Well, that is a huge problem, and it's not going to be a problem that's going to get fixed overnight. Because,
but can you give an answer in 20 seconds or less? I'm kidding.
I'm
kidding. This is a complicated question, but what advice do you have?
Well, so let me put it this way. So let's say that this person that you're talking about is a millennial. Probably a high probability they are.
Yeah, high performer.
A high performing millennial that really espouses to some kind of leadership. They want to expand their responsibilities.
Hell yeah.
This is what I would tell them.
Hmm.
Frankly, get out.
Get out.
Get out.
I like that's brash, man. That's interesting to me. Go on.
Well, so, millennials, I think millennials get a bad rap in a lot of different ways. I happen to love them. Maybe it's because I raised one, so maybe I'm biased. Millennials are not comfortable sitting around waiting for their turn to be a leader. They don't see a reason to do that. They are smart enough to know that they are as well educated, if not better educated than their boss, at least technically.
Yeah.
And they've been told since the moment of birth, if not before, that you are special, that you can accomplish anything you want to in life. And then we put them in these organizations where they are told to wait their turn, and we wonder why they're not loyal. And so I actually had this question the other day, what would I tell a millennial, let's say my son, who was working in that kind of an organization? And I'd say, get out, because you're never going to change the culture. And if you can find an organization that will intentionally develop you, and by the way, millennials are the first generation in the history of mankind that will take a cut in pay to work in a culture that's positive, where their voice can be heard. And so I would tell that person, go find another job.
Yeah, whether they're a millennial or not, it's whether a voice of follow your dharma, follow that vocation, and be making that difference. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean that sounds pretty rash, but someone who's that low in the, and I hate the idea of the hierarchy. Someone who's in that position, they're never going to change the culture, which is part of my why. Is I want to change the culture, the system of leadership, because systems of leadership, like every other system, can be designed to capture that voice, but it does require a system that in effect builds the culture.
So that being said, I'm gonna plug your book.
Thank you.
Dan's book, Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership, Cracking the Code of Sustainable Team Performance. An excellent read. I've enjoyed that. And we've touched on communication. We've touched on respect. We've touched on being present to people. These are this is the DNA of improvement. This is the DNA of healthcare. This is the DNA of how things are going to turn around in this battle cry for improving healthcare around the planet. And it all connects to love. So Dan, I want to honor you for bringing love into this conversation. I want to ring that bell again for not only for the Salvation Army, but for love. So one of my favorite questions I love to ask folks on the show is, if you, for just a brief moment, had the attention of all the healthcare folks on the planet, the doctors, nurses, even the lawyers that work in the hospital, everyone in healthcare, from the staff, the pharmacists, for a brief moment on the whole planet, you had their attention, what would you say to them?
I would say, if you want to turn around your organization, healthcare in general, but more specifically your hospital, your clinic, your organization, if you want to massively transform that organization, there's one thing you need to do, and that is transform the experience of your workforce. And I'm not saying that that's easy, but it is as simple as that. If you transform the experience of your workforce, you will transform your organization, and do it on a massive scale. I'll give you one example. It doesn't happen to be in healthcare, but I'll give you one example.
I want to hear your example, and I want to point out this applies to everyone, whether you actually are at the HR level of transforming the experience or just being part of transforming the experience.
Yes.
What you're touching on, Dan, is that we can all be part of that. And
absolutely.
Quite frankly, the leaders also need the support of the front line for all of us to transform the experience. So please, I'm curious, what's your example?
Okay, so the example actually is an elementary school. And I know that somebody is driving down the road thinking, yeah, elementary school, what does that have to do with me? I'm a CEO of a major hospital.
You got me now. I want to hear this. This is great.
Okay, all right.
I'm a former hospital CEO. I want to hear this.
Okay, and I would argue that anybody in an executive position in a large organization ought to practice, or ought to try being the principal of an elementary school for a day. I think they would go running back to their executive suite. But this elementary school of 450 students, students. When Aaron became the principal, the ratio, the free and reduced lunch rate was right around 65%. That means that 65% of the student population lived in an economic, social economic environment where they qualified for a free and or reduced lunch. And when Aaron took this school over, it was the lowest performing school in a district of 18 elementary schools. So it's the lowest performing school. The prior principal had been run out of town by the union. There is open hostility and infighting with the staff. She actually had the opportunity to go to a very prestigious school full of people with lots of money and lots of high academic expectations for their children. So, but true to form, she takes the more challenging opportunity. 5 years later, it's the highest performing elementary school in a district of 18 elementary schools.
Wow.
And when that wasn't good enough, they kicked it up another notch and became one of the few schools in the nation to actually close the achievement gap, which in public K-12 education is a massive, massive accomplishment.
That's like landing on the moon.
That's like throwing a dart and hitting the moon. And when I was asking her approach to leadership, exactly what she said, leadership? I don't know anything about leadership. She then went on to describe for me the most eloquent system of leadership I found outside the United States government, United States Army. And when I asked her how she approaches the subject of leadership that she says she doesn't know anything about, she says, well, this won't be very popular, but love and grace. And again, I was like, where did those words come from? And then she started talking, and then she started talking about collaboration and designing a culture for her organization where people could collaborate. And what it really was the experience of her team. 75 educational professionals, including the janitors and custodians. They all wanted to feel part of a team. They all wanted to collaborate. They all wanted to feel, as they said in their team charter, optimistically hopeful. So at the end of the day, they wanted to feel optimistically hopeful that they were doing a job that was going to impact students. And it was all about the experience of her workforce, having that feeling of, I am valued here, I belong here, my input is important, and I am free and open to collaborate with other teachers and innovate. In fact, when we got done with the conversation, she had talked about love and collaboration. She hadn't said the word grace again since the first question. So I said, well, so you talked about love and collaboration, but you haven't talked about grace. She said, where does that come from? And she pulls back the sleeve of her blouse. She said, and she points to the word grace that she had tattooed to her wrist. She said, this is how we do innovation. She said, sometimes we get a brilliant idea of how to teach, fourth grade math, and we think it's going to be the next greatest thing on the planet. And she said, sometimes it doesn't work. And she said, we have to learn to forgive ourselves. And as she says that, she's pointing out to me multiple Kleenex boxes around her office. And she said, when we innovate, we have to take a risk. And my job as the principal is to support that. And sometimes that means I hand a teacher a Kleenex box because they're heartbroken. They just spent 2 weeks teaching math and it didn't work.
Yeah, powerful. Optimistically hopeful.
Yeah.
The optimism that there is a solution and the hope that it will be implemented. It's part of the Restore assessment. Actually, I use consulting work that I do with healthcare folks. I'm so glad you touched on that. Optimistically hopeful, grace, love, compassion. I think that there has been so much sorrow in healthcare when we lose a patient that that it is heartbreaking every time. And there also needs to be self-forgiveness when you do your best and you're not able to perform, and the moral dilemma that healthcare people are going through right now with COVID. You just this is just a delicious episode. I hope you've enjoyed this, Dan. I certainly have enjoyed getting to talk with you, and I hope our listeners have been able to have a feast in this conversation, and hopefully a nurturance and support for the heart as well. So if folks are interested in following up with you, learning more about you, or getting a copy of your book, where can folks go?
Well, best place is my website, danieledds.com. I got a resource page where I've got actually have a whole two special reports that are free. One is titled 4 Strategies to Engage the Workforce, where I go into that in more detail, as well as 16 specific action items they could take to engage the workforce. And then a newer one called Creating a Courageous Culture, where instead of focusing on developing courageous leaders, we flip that around and say, why don't we think about developing a courageous workforce?
I love it. One of my daily contemplations is to embrace courage, compassion, joy, and hope. Okay. And when you talk about creating a courageous culture, it's not only fun alliteration to say, it speaks to hope and optimism. So Dan, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'll be including your website in the show notes. Dan, thank you so much for being part of the show. And it's just a real joy.
Great honor. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, or leave a review about the show on your favorite platform, and learn how to support the podcast as a patron at swifthealthcare.com, where you can also find the show notes and all of our episodes. Thanks for joining us.